This is a tale from the book of Judges, chapter 19, to be exact. It's about a Levite, his concubine, and an act of violence that led to a civil war. Yeah, you heard me right, a civil war among the tribes of Israel, all starting from one horrible, horrifying night. Levites were part of the priestly tribe, so they were supposed to be the spiritual leaders of Israel. He's got a concubine, which is sort of like a secondary wife back in those days. But things between them aren't great. The concubine runs away from him, back to her father's house in Bethlehem. For 4 months, she's there, and eventually, the Levite decides to go after her, to bring her back. He makes the journey to her father's house, and her dad's actually pretty happy to see him. There's this whole thing where the father keeps delaying their departure, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days of hospitality, food, and drinks, until finally, on the 5th day, they leave. But it's late in the day, so they end up stopping in a town called Gibeah to spend the night. Now, here's where things start going downhill. Gibeah is part of the tribe of Benjamin. The Levite and his concubine are in the town square, waiting for someone to offer them a place to stay because, culturally, that's what people did back then. Finally, an old man invites them into his home for the night. He warns them not to stay outside because, apparently, Gibeah isn't exactly the safest place after dark. Oh, right? As night falls, the house gets surrounded by some wicked men from the town, yeah, like a mob. They bang on the door, demanding the old man hand over the Levite so they can, well, assault him. Sound familiar? It's almost a mirror of what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, the old man does something completely shocking. He offers up his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine instead. It's horrifying, but things get even worse. The Levite hands over his concubine to the mob. All night long, she's brutally abused by these men. By the time morning comes, she's barely alive. She manages to crawl back to the door of the house, where she collapses. And here's where the story just punches you in the gut. The Levite wakes up in the morning, opens the door, and there she is, lying at the threshold with her hands on the doorstep. He says, "Get up, let's go." But she doesn't respond, she's dead. Now, if that wasn't tragic enough, what happens next sends shockwaves through all of Israel. The Levite takes her body home, and he does something so shocking it almost defies belief. He cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends 1 piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Yeah. He actually dismembers her and sends the pieces across the land as a call to arms, demanding justice for what happened in Gibeah. When the tribes receive these gruesome parcels, they are horrified, and all of Israel gathers together to confront the tribe of Benjamin, who refuses to hand over the guilty men of Gibeah. What follows is a brutal civil war, with tens of thousands of people dying. The tribe of Benjamin is almost wiped out completely. Only a few hundred men survive. It's a story that doesn't get told much in Sunday school for obvious reasons, but it's in the Bible. You can read the whole thing in Judges 19 to 21. It's raw, it's brutal, and it shows just how dark things can get when a society loses its moral compass. In those days, Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. Judges 21 verse 25. So, after the intense events in Gibeah, you'd think things might cool down a bit, but no, this next story is just as wild, though in a totally different way. We're diving into 1 Kings chapter 13, and this one's all about a prophet who gets a direct word from God, follows through, and then gets caught in a deadly situation. It's a story about how even the righteous can be deceived and how one misstep can lead to devastating consequences. Here's what's going down. In 1 Kings 13, we meet a prophet, a man of God, sent from Judah to deliver a message to King Jeroboam in Bethel. Now, Jeroboam is not exactly the kind of king that's setting a good example. He's built altars to golden calves, leading Israel into idolatry. So, the prophet comes in with a powerful message from God, calling out the king right there as he's offering sacrifices on this altar. The prophet even gives a sign to prove his message is real. The altar splits apart, and the ashes spill out, just like he said. King Jeroboam, of course, does not take this well. He stretches out his hand to order the prophet's arrest, but then something crazy happens. His hand withers right there on the spot. He freaks out and begs the prophet to pray for him, and sure enough, after the prayer, his hand is restored. Jeroboam offers the prophet a reward, invites him to stay for a meal, but the prophet declines. He's under strict instructions from God: don't eat, don't drink, and don't return the way you came. Seems like everything is going smoothly, right? The prophet delivered God's message, obeyed the Lord's command, and now he's on his way home. But this is where things take a sharp, unexpected turn. As the prophet is traveling back, another man enters the story. This guy is also called a prophet, an old prophet living in Bethel. He hears about what went down at the altar and decides to track down this man of God. When he finds him, the old prophet invites him back to his house for a meal. But remember, God had explicitly told the first prophet not to eat or drink anything in Bethel. The man of God refuses, repeating the command he received from God. And then the old prophet does something shocking. He lies. He tells the man of God that an angel of the Lord came to him and said it was okay for him to come back and eat with him. And here's where it gets tragic. The man of God believes him. They go back to the old prophet's house, and while they're eating, the old prophet suddenly receives a real word from God. The message? The man of God is going to die because he disobeyed God's command. As soon as the meal is over, the man of God gets back on his donkey, continuing his journey. But he doesn't make it home. On the road, a lion attacks and kills him. Here's the eerie part: the lion doesn't eat the body or the donkey. It just stands there, guarding the corpse, as if to show this was no random accident. People pass by and see the strange sight: the man of God lying dead on the road, the lion standing next to him, and the donkey unharmed. The old prophet, the very one who deceived him, hears about this and goes to retrieve the body. He buries the man of God in his own tomb, mourning for him, and tells his sons that when he dies, he wants to be buried in the same tomb, next to the man of God. Alright, so far we've covered stories of extreme violence and deception, but now we're moving into something just as dramatic and gut-wrenching: the story of Jephthah, a man whose rash vow leads to one of the most heartbreaking moments in the Bible. This story comes from Judges chapter 11, and trust me, it'll leave you thinking long after. So, let's set the scene. Israel is in trouble, as usual during this time in the book of Judges. They've turned away from God, and now the Ammonites, a neighboring nation, are coming after them. Israel, desperate for a leader, turns to Jephthah, a warrior known for being tough. Here's the thing though: Jephthah's background is complicated. He's the son of a prostitute, and because of that, his half-brothers ran him out of their home when he was younger. But now that Israel is in need, they're calling on him to lead them in battle. And despite everything, Jephthah agrees to help, but not without negotiating some terms. He tells the leaders of Israel, "If you want me to lead you, and if the Lord gives me victory, I want to be your leader permanently." So Jephthah gathers his army, and before going into battle, he does something we've seen many times in the Bible: he makes a vow to God. But this vow? It's a big one, and it's about to take this story in a tragic direction. Jephthah promises that if God grants him victory over the Ammonites, he will sacrifice whatever comes out of the doors of his house first when he returns home. Well, Jephthah leads Israel into battle, and they win. It's a massive victory, and he's riding high. But now comes the part that's tough to stomach. As he returns home, guess who comes out of his house first to greet him? His daughter. His only child. She comes out dancing, celebrating her father's victory, completely unaware of the vow her father made. You can feel the dread build up as Jephthah sees her. He tears his clothes in anguish, realizing the weight of the vow he made. His daughter, upon hearing what's happened, responds in a way that's both heartbreaking and incredibly brave. She asks for 2 months to go up into the mountains and mourn her fate, because she will die without ever marrying or having children. Jephthah grants her this time, and after 2 months, she returns. The Bible doesn't go into graphic detail here, but it's clear that Jephthah fulfills his vow. The text simply says, "He did to her as he had vowed." Now, there's a lot of debate about whether Jephthah actually sacrificed his daughter or if she was condemned to a life of celibacy. But either way, it's a tragic ending, and it all stems from a promise made in the heat of the moment. You can find this story in Judges 11 verses 29 to 40, and it's another example of how the Bible doesn't shy away from the raw, uncomfortable parts of life. Alright, we've just gone through some seriously heavy stories, but now we're shifting gears into something that, on the surface, might seem small, almost trivial, but it carries a huge message. We're talking about the floating axe head. This story comes from 2 Kings chapter 6, and it's one of those moments where God steps into an everyday problem and shows just how much He cares about even the little things in life. Here's what's going on. The prophet Elisha is leading a group of younger prophets, kind of like a school of prophets. They're growing in number, and they decide they need to expand their living quarters. So they head down to the Jordan River to cut some logs and build a bigger space. Everything's going fine, but then one of the guys has a problem. While he's chopping wood, the iron axe head flies off the handle and plunges straight into the river. Now, this might not seem like a big deal at first, but there's a catch: the axe was borrowed. Back in those days, iron tools weren't easy to come by, and borrowing something like an axe was a big deal. Losing it could mean serious trouble. The young prophet panics and calls out to Elisha, "Oh no, my lord! It was borrowed." He's clearly stressed, knowing he's responsible for returning something he can't easily replace. And here's where things get really interesting. Elisha, in his calm, collected way, asks the man where the axe head fell. The young prophet points to the spot, and Elisha does something unexpected. He cuts a stick, throws it into the water at that exact spot, and boom, the iron axe head floats to the surface. Now, think about this for a second. Iron doesn't float. This is a straight-up miracle, but it's not some earth-shattering, headline-grabbing event like parting the Red Sea. It's not a battle won, and it's not a mighty king brought low. This is about a borrowed axe head, something that seems so small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And yet, God steps in. This moment shows us something powerful about God's character. He's not just there for the big, life-altering moments, He's also there for the everyday problems, the stuff that keeps you up at night but maybe feels too small to pray about. It's like this subtle reminder that nothing is too insignificant for God to handle. If He can make an axe head float, what else is He willing to do for the small struggles in our lives? Alright, following the story of the floating axe head, we're moving into one of the strangest and, honestly, kind of hilarious moments in the Bible. But trust me, there's more to it than just a funny story. This one comes from Numbers chapter 22, and it's about a man named Balaam, his donkey, and a divine encounter that'll make you rethink how God can speak to people. Balaam is a prophet, but he's not exactly on the same page with God. The story takes place during a time when the Israelites are wandering through the desert on their way to the Promised Land, and they've just had a major victory over a couple of enemy kings. This freaks out the local leaders, especially a guy named Balak, who is the king of Moab. Balak sees what the Israelites have done to their enemies, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't want any of that smoke." So, what does he do? He hires Balaam to curse the Israelites, hoping that'll weaken them. Now, Balaam is an interesting character. He's a prophet for hire, and while he seems to have some connection with God, his heart is in the wrong place. He's all about that paycheck, and when Balak's messengers come to him with an offer of money, Balaam is ready to roll. But here's the thing, God already told Balaam not to go with these guys. God didn't want him cursing his people. Balaam, however, is persistent, and eventually, God tells him to go, but with one condition: only say what I tell you to say. So Balaam saddles up his donkey and starts heading toward Moab. This is where things get wild. As Balaam and his donkey are cruising down the road, the donkey suddenly stops. Why? Because there's an angel of the Lord standing in the way, sword drawn, ready to strike. Now, here's the crazy part. Balaam doesn't see the angel, but his donkey does. And the donkey's like, "Nope, not today," and veers off the road into a field. Balaam is furious and beats the donkey to get her back on track. But that's just the beginning. A second time, the angel appears, this time in a narrow path between two vineyards. Again, the donkey sees the angel, and with no room to turn, she presses up against a wall, crushing Balaam's foot. And again, Balaam beats the donkey. Finally, the third time, the angel blocks the way completely, and the donkey just sits down. She's done. And, of course, Balaam starts wailing on her again. Here's where it gets really bizarre. In that moment, God opens the donkey's mouth, and she straight up starts talking to Balaam. Yeah, you heard that right, a talking donkey. She says, "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" And Balaam, instead of freaking out like you'd expect, actually responds. He's so mad he doesn't even realize how insane this conversation is. He says, "You've made a fool of me. If I had a sword, I'd kill you right now." Then the donkey calmly replies, "Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden, to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" Balaam admits that she hasn't, and at that moment, God opens Balaam's eyes. Finally, he sees the angel standing in the road with a sword drawn. Balaam realizes what's been going on and falls face down. The angel tells him, "I came here to stop you because your path is reckless before me. The donkey saw me and turned away. If she hadn't, I would have killed you by now." This moment is both comical and deeply profound. God uses a talking donkey to stop a prophet from heading down a dangerous path. It's a reminder that God can use anything, or anyone, to get our attention, even when we're too blind or stubborn to see what's right in front of us. Balaam ends up continuing his journey, but he can only speak the words God puts in his mouth, and spoiler alert, instead of cursing Israel, he blesses them multiple times, much to Balak's frustration. Alright, after the intense stories we've already covered, we now arrive at a moment that's both shocking and tragic, but this time it's all about a single act of disobedience with devastating consequences. This story, found in 2 Samuel chapter 6, revolves around the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred object representing the very presence of God, and a man named Uzzah, whose intentions were good but whose actions led to his sudden death. King David is finally bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. It's a huge celebration, David's leading the way, and the people are rejoicing. They've been through a lot, and this moment is a big deal for the nation of Israel. The Ark, which has been kept in various locations since the time of Moses, is now going to its rightful place in the heart of Israel. Now, here's where things start to go wrong. The Ark is being transported on a cart pulled by oxen, but here's the thing, it was never supposed to be transported that way. According to the instructions given in the law of Moses, the Ark was meant to be carried on poles by the Levites. But in their excitement, they put it on a cart, probably trying to make the trip faster or easier. It's a small detail, but this mistake sets the stage for what's about to happen. As they're traveling along, the oxen stumble, and the Ark starts to tip. Uzzah, one of the men walking alongside the cart, reaches out to steady it. He touches the Ark, and in that instant, he's struck down by God. Uzzah dies right there, in front of everyone. Now, you're probably thinking, wait, what? He was just trying to help, right? And you're absolutely right, Uzzah's intention was good. He didn't want the Ark to fall to the ground. But here's the thing, the Ark was so holy, so set apart, that no one was allowed to touch it. Even though Uzzah's act seemed harmless, it violated God's law, and the consequences were immediate. David is devastated. He's angry, confused, and afraid. He stops the entire procession and leaves the Ark at the house of a man named Obed-Edom. The whole event throws a shadow over what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. The Bible says that David was afraid of the Lord that day and asked, "How can the Ark of the Lord ever come to me?" The Ark stays at Obed-Edom's house for 3 months, and during that time, God blesses Obed-Edom and his household. Finally, David realizes that he must handle the Ark with the utmost care and reverence. When they eventually bring it to Jerusalem, it's done the right way, by the Levites, carrying it with poles, as the law had instructed. Now, this story is a tough one because it challenges our understanding of God's holiness. Uzzah's death feels harsh because his heart seemed to be in the right place. But it serves as a reminder that God's instructions matter, and even well-intentioned actions can have serious consequences if they go against his commands. You can find this story in 2 Samuel 6 verses 1 to 7. It's a striking example of how seriously God's presence and holiness were taken, and it underscores the importance of obedience, even when our intentions seem good. Alright, so that wraps up our journey through some of the Bible's most forgotten yet powerful stories. From civil war sparked by brutal injustice to prophets deceived into disobedience, and even a talking donkey, the Bible is packed with stories that challenge us, shock us, and make us think deeply about faith, obedience, and how God moves in unexpected ways. Thank you so much for sticking with us through these incredible stories. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more of these fascinating biblical narratives to life, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, God bless you all.